There's a large part of me that wishes that the title of this podcast was clickbait, that it wasn't the end of the podcast. However, that is the truth. This will be the final episode of the podcast, the Josh Forti Effect, formerly Think Different Theory, at least for now and as we know it. And I want to start off by saying that I'm going to be more honest in this podcast episode than I have been in a while. Not because I haven't been honest before, but I'm just going to be more open and vulnerable about what's been going on over the course of the past 3 to 6 months of my life and what the future vision of things is moving forward. And before I kind of get into the details of what comes next or why we're closing this down or anything like that, I want to back up and tell you the backstory and kind of take you back about 6 months ago to a very interesting point in my life and a very interesting turning point when I was very confused and trying to figure out what came next. The other thing that I'll say is that this book right here, The Laws of Success, Napoleon Hill, has played an instrumental role recently and just in the future direction of the change of where I'm going. So 6 months ago, roughly, give or take, towards the end of last year, end of third quarter of last year, I had a significant change happen in my life where I parted ways with one of my largest, if not my largest client that I'd ever worked with. I'd worked for the past 2 years or a year and a half leading up to that point inside of companies where I would go in and I would take the skill sets that I had learned and build their marketing departments for them. If you don't know my background, I've grown and managed over 6 million followers on social media, and I had a thriving business until my brother died, passed away in a helicopter crash. From there, I sold that business. I went around the world and I came back and I decided that I was going to work inside of super successful multi-7-figure and 8-figure companies, helping them build their marketing departments and helping them better figure out business because I wasn't sure what I wanted to go through and do next. And so towards the end of last year, end of third quarter of last year, it got to the point where I was ready to move on. I was ready to go on for what was next. It wasn't anything about the clients I was working with. They were awesome. They were amazing. But it was just time to go and take that next chapter and turn that next page in my life. And I had recently gotten married. And so my wife and I were really just, getting into sync with everything. And we were ready to kind of go and take that next chapter. And when I parted ways, I thought that the next chapter would be relatively simple. I thought that it would be relatively clear, and I thought that it was going to be relatively easy to just pick right off where I left off inside of my business and continue on. But it wasn't. It was very difficult. In fact, it wasn't difficult in the type of work that I was doing, but it was difficult to know what to do, what my passion was. And I quickly realized that when you take give or take 2 years going around the world, traveling, and then working only with clients, when you take 2 years away from building an audience, building social media presence, emailing your email list, when you just stop all that from 2 years, you don't really get to just pick right back up where you left off. That is a process, but it was a process that I didn't know that I was about to go and face. And so for the next couple of months after I had left and parted ways with the company that I was working with at the time, or working inside of and helping them build out their marketing department, I kind of felt really, really, really lost. And I mean really lost. I wasn't sure what came next. I wasn't sure what I was doing inside of my business. And for whatever reason, the skill sets that I had, even though I knew that I was very, very good at them, were not working. And it wasn't because the skill sets themselves weren't working when I did them for other people's businesses, but they weren't working when I did them in my own business. And I couldn't figure out why. I couldn't figure out why things that had worked so well, that had made hundreds of thousands and even millions of dollars, weren't working. And how I could go into somebody else's business and I could implement them and they would work really, really well. But then inside of my own business, they wouldn't work. And it wasn't like I was doing things differently per se. It was just that they weren't working and I couldn't figure out why. And on top of that, I would wake up every day, and while I was excited about life and I was excited about the fact that I worked for myself and that, I didn't really have responsibilities, if you were, I didn't have a boss or a job that I hated, right? I had a lot of freedom. I felt miserable isn't the right word, but I just felt very lost and disconnected with purpose. I felt lost and disconnected with self. And I felt like I wasn't making the money that I wanted to make, but that there was an underlying thing that was like, it's not about money. Because I had plenty of money in the bank, right? Like I could have stopped working for months and months and months and still been able to pay my bills and live my lifestyle. But the problem is that I wasn't moving forward. The problem is I wasn't clear, but I didn't know that at the time, right? I just was in this blur and it was in this spot of what happens next. And about halfway through that spot is when I got the ruling back from Apple that we had to change Think Different Theory. And I could no longer use the only thing in my life at the time that seemed to be certain. The only thing that I seemed to believe in which was think different theory. And that I knew that thinking different was the key to everything in life, because thinking differently and doing differently than everybody else was doing is the only thing that had consistently served me in life. When everybody else told me to get a job, I went and did my own thing. When everybody else told me to go to college, I went and self-educated. When everybody else told me that Instagram was a waste of time, I went all in on the platform. When everybody else told me that social media was a fad, I made tons of money off of it and grew followers, right? And when everybody else told me that hiring a mindset coach was crazy and spending $60,000 on a coach when I didn't have a business was the worst decision of my life, it ended up being the best decision of my life. And so that idea of think different and thinking different, and the idea of think different theory behind that, all of a sudden was gone. And now I had to go and I had to figure out what, right? And so I had a deadline, and I only had a very short period of time, right, to completely rebrand and to basically go and come up with a new name of the podcast, come up with a new idea behind it, come up with a new focus, come up with a rebrand, and figure all that out. And let me tell you, like, when you pour your whole life into something for like 2 or 3 years, like, it doesn't change in 2 weeks. It doesn't change in a month. And so I went through and I launched the Josh Forti Effect, which I like. Don't get me wrong. I like the logo with it, and I understand what I was trying to do with it and trying to position myself as a personal brand. But honestly, right away, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel authentic. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel like it was an accurate representation of where I was at the time. And it wasn't, because it wasn't born out of certainty. Think different theory was built out of certainty. Think different theory had a very clear goal and a very clear objective that I was chasing, that I was doing. Think different theory was this place where when I got into it, when I locked in, like, that was me. That was the most pure and unfiltered version of who I was. And the interviews that I had just flowed. They were effortless. And people asked how I would do such good interviews, how I create such good content. And the answer was just like, I loved it. I was just in flow. But at this time, when I was moving with Think Different Theory and trying to figure out the next things, or moving into Josh Forti Effect and trying to figure out the next things, I wasn't in flow. I didn't have certainty. I didn't have the confidence. I didn't have the enthusiasm. It was lacking, and it felt forced, and it felt rushed. And that sucks to admit, right? But it's the truth. Now, the one thing that I'm going to say as a side note here is I didn't quit. And so this is very important. If you're ever going through something where it sucks, like, you just can't quit. And that's one thing that became very, very evident through this entire time, is you just keep going and going and going and going and going. And I remember inside of my business, I just started trying things. First, I did webinars on personal development, and then I did webinars on master stories, and I did webinars on audience launches. I did webinars, and master stories stuck, which we'll get to in a second. But like, there was so much confusion, but I just did what I knew to do. I knew that I needed to do trainings. I knew that what made me feel alive was teaching. Not even pitching or selling, literally just teaching. And so I would go live every week. Sometimes it was on a Zoom call. Sometimes it was a webinar. Sometimes it was in coaching. Sometimes it was in the Facebook group. And I just kept going and going and trying to figure different things out. And as I would go on, the more I felt out of alignment with the Josh Forti Effect, the more I felt like that it wasn't bad, but that how I had portrayed it and what I had said was not in alignment with what I was trying to become. And so inside of my business, things started to click. Things started to kind of get more clear as far as the tools that I used, right? And so one of the things that I learned, I'll just briefly touch on this, but one of the tools that I learned, for example, is Master Stories. And so the reason I like Master Stories so much is because when I hired my mindset coach, and I'll make this super short, but basically she taught me that along my journey of personal development, along my journey to achieve success, that the stories that I tell myself will determine my outcome. And so master stories are that same idea applied in marketing, in business, in building your movements, in building your mission, in your calling, and doing what you love to do in life. And so that started to work. But what I realized is that inside of the master story, in order for the master story to work, in order for stories to work, there had to be a goal. There had to be an outcome. There had to be something that we were running towards. There had to be something that I just believed in so strongly that it would, that's what a master story does. And we would teach, like, what's that outcome? What's that desire? What are we chasing? And I realized that was just missing in my life. And I wasn't sure what it was. And I'll never forget, as I picked up this book right here, The Laws of Success. And I have to tell you the story about how I picked this book because it's actually kind of funny, right? So last year I read, I don't know, it was like 26 books or 27 books, something like that I read. It was a lot of books, right? It was almost a book every other week, 2 books a month. And I remember getting done, and at the beginning of this year, I was like, that was amazing. I learned so much, but this year I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to go and I'm just going to read like 12 books, 1 a month, and I'm going to write like full reports on them. And I want to like study them more deeply, right? And so a couple months in, 3 months into this year, I realized that I wasn't really getting it done. And I would start a book and I'd read like halfway through and then I'd change and then I'd read it, and I wasn't getting it done. And so I was like, okay, I've got to go and I just got to pick a book. I got to pick one book that I'm just going to go through, and I'm going to just go through it all the way from tip to tail. And I'm just going to study this book, and I'm going to live this book, and I'm just going to let this one book transform my life. Like, that is the goal. And so I took out all the books, and I pulled out, for example, I pulled out Traffic Secrets and Expert Secrets. I pulled out Outwitting the Devil, which was another Napoleon Hill book. I took out $100 Million Offers. I took down Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself and Psycho-Cybernetics. I took down a couple other ones, right? And I laid them all out on the floor because these are all different books that I wanted to either read or reread and go through and really study, right? And so I go, and I'm laying them out on the floor. And this book originally, The Laws of Success, wasn't actually part of that, right? It wasn't part of the thing. I just had it sitting over there. And I remember looking at the book by Napoleon Hill, which is one of my favorite books of all time, which was Outwitting the Devil, and how I was like, man, I want to read more about him. And so I go and I pull this book off the shelf, The Laws of Success. It's this massive book. And I opened it up and I just started reading the inside because I didn't even know I had it, right? I didn't even know what it was. And so I started reading it, and it starts talking about how this right here, the laws of success, are the 15 irrefutable laws of success that every single successful person throughout history ever has always used. And it's written by Napoleon Hill, arguably the greatest personal development author of all time. And like, while that's a big claim, I've already been sold on Napoleon Hill. I've already been sold on his work, on his writings. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of him. Russell Brunson, who's a close friend of mine, he's a huge fan of him, is buying up some of his stuff as well. And so I was sold. I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to go and I'm going to open up this book and I'm going to read it and I'm going to do exactly what it says, right? It's a huge book. It might take me the rest of the year for all I know, right? And I open up, I start reading. It's like a course. It's actually like a course. It's not. It has specific tactical instructions at the end of the thing. And I'm like, this is what I want to do, right? This is what I'm going to do. And so I go and I open up this book, and the very first thing that it talks about, I'm going through, I read the introduction, I open up in chapter 1, the very first thing that it says, that if you want to be successful in life, if you want to go and you want to have just a crazy amount of success, it is absolutely 100% critical that you have what he calls a definite chief aim in life. A definite chief aim. Or in other words, a super ridiculously clear goal on where it is that you are going. And I realized this, I read this and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been looking for. And not only that, this reinforces the realization that I've had that I'm missing that. I have the tools. I know what to do, but I don't know why I'm doing it. I don't know where I was going at the time. And so this was I don't know, however long it was that I picked this up. And I started reading this, and I'm going through, and like, this is a huge book. I'm only like halfway through, and I'm just applying absolutely everything. And just in a short period of time, by going through and by figuring out, first off, where I'm going, my life has started to change. It started to transform. Like, it's insane. Like, I've come out of this uncertainty mode. I've come out of this, these last 6 months of confusion. I've come out of this overwhelm, and I've come out of this thing, and I'm like, I have clarity. I have certainty. I have confidence for the very first time in a while. And that's really difficult to admit, right? It was like, wow. Like, I went through this, and it sucked. It was so bad. I remember there would be nights I would cry myself, like I'd be in tears, right? And I would go over to my wife, and I'd be like, why am I so stuck? I am not the guy that gets stuck. I'm the guy that takes action. I'm the guy that has clarity. I'm the guy that just runs when everybody else is uncertain. Why am I struggling with this right now? I've never dealt with this before. And this book gave me the answer. It's because I didn't have a definite chief aim. I wasn't applying the laws of success in my life. And so as I sat down and I started asking myself and following the actual instructions of the book, not just reading it, as I actually started going and doing it, I started to realize something, that my podcast is out of alignment with what I'm trying to accomplish and do. The days of Think Different theory are over. And the Josh Forti Effect is not just carrying on that legacy. It needs to change. There needs to be a revived state of where I'm going for. And I felt like Josh Forti Effect didn't go through and accurately portray that. I have a massive vision for the future. And what's crazy is that I haven't even had time to articulate it all yet. I haven't gotten the branding right. I haven't figured it all out. I just know that by applying it in my own life, that it's worked, that it's working. And so as I look at the podcast, I'm realizing I can't just go and start talking about this stuff on the podcast. There needs to be a rebrand. And not just a rebrand of a logo or a name. Maybe I use the same logo. I might. But there needs to be a shift where there's this clear stopping point and then a clear starting point. And from episode 1, day 1, moment 1, I can paint the vision of where I'm going because it's exciting. And I'll give you a little sneak peek of this, right? There's so much here that I want to do, but I really, really believe, actually, I can't tell you the name. I don't have that name for the new podcast yet, but I have a name for the people inside of the movement and who I'm becoming. And like my vision, and I'll share just a super brief sneak peek, but my vision for what comes next is to empower leaders and to empower people to become not just the best version of themselves, but the best version of who they're called to be by God or that higher power, to go out and build strong communities, to build audiences, to build movements around ideas that they believe in, and then monetize those effectively to get people bought in. And there's so much psychology behind it. There's so much psychology about not just building movements through content, but about building movements through product, through sales, through understanding what gets people to buy in and believe, and to help people become powerful men and women, but specifically men, and to be influential, and to be insanely wealthy, and to be free. And I want this, but I feel like where I'm at right now is not accurately aligned. And so because of that, I'm shutting down the podcast. All of that to say, to get to that point. I'm stopping the Josh Forti Effect. And we're going to be going all in. I just purchased a brand new camera, streams 4K and 1080 HD. Like, I got microphones and we've got lighting setups coming. We got all sorts of really cool things that we're investing in. And behind the scenes, I'm doing some really, really cool stuff. Hint, hint, some stuff with Russell Brunson and ClickFunnels, right? Some stuff with other people of my community that I'm partnering with and really bringing this movement, which I'm not talking to you about here, moving forward. But I just feel like this, applying what has been taught in this book, The Laws of Success by Napoleon Hill, and understanding what my definite chief aim is, and understanding what it takes to be enthusiastic and persuasive and to build movements and to have success and to create wealth and to create lasting impact on people's lives, that the name and the launch of this podcast does just not do justice. It has to be fresh, and I have to become certain of it. And so I want to thank you. If you're a listener of this podcast, if you've been here since day one or at any point along the way you've come and joined, I want to say thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this. And this is not the end. I'm shutting down this podcast, but there will be a gap of time. Maybe it'll be a couple weeks. Maybe it'll be a couple months. We're still working on the exact details of it. I don't have all the answers right now, which is crazy. Normally I'm like so certain about like, this is what we're going to do and here's when and how, but I'm just trusting God right now. And I'm just trusting this understanding of this newfound clarity and how nothing else makes sense right now except for what I'm chasing after, and how there's absolute clarity there and everything else is just a blur, and how every step that I take in faith and that I take in action towards that, more is revealed itself and it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. And I'm just betting on that. And so don't worry, I'll be back on social media. We're going to be going big into YouTube. That's why I got the video camera and everything like that. But like my future mission is going to change the world. And I don't mean maybe not the whole world, but I mean the lives of those of myself and those that I come in contact with. And we're going to start with real interaction with real people. That's another thing he talks about, is the power of a mastermind and getting around like-minded people. And there's just so many ideas. And so basically I tell you all this to summarize it all down to this. I want to help leaders become the best version of themselves. And I have found a new chief aim in life. And my current podcast, the current type of content, how I'm producing things, how I've positioned it, is not in alignment with the future self. And so rather than continue to produce something that's out of alignment, rather than to just put out content for the sake of putting out content, which, by the way, I love creating content, rather than doing that, I'm taking a pause. And I'm getting solid. I'm getting certain. I'm building the foundation correctly. I'm getting down to the absolute fundamentals of truth and absolute fundamentals of success and absolute fundamentals of where I'm going. And I'm going to get people to buy into it. And if it's not you, great. But I promise you that when we come back, there's going to be absolute certainty. There's going to be absolute clarity. And we're going to charge completely around that. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a leader, if you are an influencer, if you're someone that knows that you have a calling, you have something inside of you that is bigger than yourself, and you are committed to bringing that into reality, whether it's an idea or whether it's a business or whether it's a belief or whether it's something that, whether it's charity or whether it's a business, whatever. If you are called to go and to become a better version of yourself, if you are called to become bigger than yourself, if you know you want to be wildly influential, wildly powerful, wildly wealthy, and wildly free, if you know you want that, then the community that we're going to build on the way back is for you. And I invite you to stick around and check that out, because Here's the thing. The world is going to continue to put you in a box, and it has done this my whole life. And I don't want to go too farther in this. I want to keep this kind of shorter, on the shorter side. But like, the world is going to try to put you in a box. They're going to try to tell you to not be controversial, to not stand up for what you believe in, to not build businesses, to not cause controversy, to not go out there and change the world, to be less, to fit in a box, to defer till later, to not speak your mind, to not chase your dreams. They're going to tell you all those things. And they're going to tell you it's unnecessary. They're going to tell you that you hurt people along the process. They're going to tell you that it's not worth it. They're going to tell you that you should just be normal, and they're wrong. They're just wrong. And every time I've listened to that, I've stepped into that lie, I've become confused. Every single time that I've followed the advice of becoming less, or to not chase after that gut feeling inside of me, to not go after the thing which I'm called to go and do, every single time I have gone in and stepped into confusion. And it sucks. And I don't like life. And I don't like being around people at that point. And it sucks because it's confusion and it's uncertainty and it's not true to who I am. And the same is going to be true for you. Find out that definite chief aim in life and go after it. Okay, I'm done lecturing now. But seriously, I want to teach, I want to grow, I want to do, and I'm excited for what comes next. I don't know 100% what that is yet from a front-facing perspective, but I know exactly what it looks like inside my head, and I am so, so excited. So get ready. We're going to be on stages this year. We're working on the works of it already, right? We have amazing new content coming. It's in the works already. Most importantly, we have a definite chief aim, and I want to help 10,000 people start businesses. That's one of my goals. And that is a very, very high up on the priority list. More on that to come. So thank you for listening to Think Different Theory. Thank you for listening to the Josh Forti Effect. Thank you for being part of my world. Thank you for being with me on the last 2 years of this journey, this 3 years now, of this crazy, insane journey, and everything that I've learned so far. And thank you for your support and for being on the email list and in the groups and listening and being a part. Thank you for becoming the best version of yourself with me on this journey. I'm so, so excited for what comes next and excited to unveil it when the time is ready. Just know that I'm absolutely committed to this, and this is not the end of the podcast forever. This is not the end of me creating content, but this is the beginning of something this is me saying no to what's not working now to create space for the beginning of what is of what the future is. Thank you so much for listening. I love you all. As always, hustle, hustle. God bless. Do not be afraid to, yes, think different. Because those of us that think different, know who we are, know ourselves, know what we believe, why we believe it, and are able to defend it, we are going to be the ones that change the world. I love you, and I will see you on the next show. Take it easy, fam. Peace.